Okay, so I'm gonna get right into this. Instead of kind of explaining, just giving an intro, I'm gonna start talking a bit about our data. So this benchmark that you're gonna see today, is the largest mobile gaming benchmark to date. We have more than 100,000 games sending data. We have more than 1.2 billion players per month that we look at, and more than 3 billion players across the world that we included in this benchmark overall. So it's massive scale, and we're going to talk today about the performance of superstar games versus just the performance of like good games and average games, and we're going to see how different those are. Okay, so first of all, something also important to know about the data. Our data is about evenly distributed between North America, Europe, Asia, with a quarter for each, more or less, and then another quarter just distributed amongst the rest of the world. So the numbers you will see today are representative for the world as a whole, but also for the main markets, Europe and the US, because more than half of the data set is from the EU and the US. I'm not going to go into how to read our graphs right now, but it would be good to know that things will be just marked separately. You will see this on the graph, so I'll explain them when you see it. So we're going to go through several things right now that we kind of have that preamble about what this data is. We're going to go through the state of engagement, so retention, average session lengths, revenue, ARPPU, ARPDAU, in terms of IEP, like are games still making money with IEP, who is converting, what genres are most successful. We're going to look a bit at ad revenue because we have some data there from our partners at Tenjin, and we're going to do then a conclusion on everything. We're going to bring everything together. Okay, so starting with engagement. I see there's an animation on this slide that you guys can't see, but it doesn't matter. I'll walk you through it. So there is, median engagement, median retention day one for games is 25%. Now, for anybody who's ever tried to make a game or an app successful, you probably know that 25% day one is super low. But by comparison, and what is great day one, so top 5% of games have 46% retention. Usually the games or start to get interesting once they pass 35% day one. So it's typically that we see that below 35% day one retention, people just won't look at it. Publishers won't look at it. Marketers won't necessarily care about promoting it. Above 35%, they start to be like, okay, you have potential, but if you could just push this game to be a little bit better. And at 46%, usually almost anybody is interested in publishing that game or investing in that game to get it out and make it successful. In terms of genres, how this is distributed, you're seeing here the top 25%. The reason I wanted to show this graph is because for the top 25% of games, all genres are kind of close together. There isn't a major difference. Like, they all behave the same, but if we look at the top 5% of games, the image starts to be very different, right? Where you see some genres do a lot better than others. The orange ones in the center are trivia and word games. Trivia and word games absolutely kick ass when it comes to retention. They are always, when we do this analysis, the genres with the highest retention. On the left, like these more casual and hyper casual like genres, action, arcade, and so on, they are all above 45%. So again, they do kind of bear out this, like if your game is about 45%, it'll have better chance of converting. But in this category, puzzle is the most competitive genre, where puzzle is around 49%. And there are famous games with puzzle mechanic like Roller Splat was a great one, where you can see that retention, like introducing puzzle mechanics to a game tends to increase its retention if that is done well, but also the puzzle genre tends to be a very competitive genre. We're going to look at day 7 next to see how this bears out. And things start to get, things start to get interesting around here, actually. So you see, all of the cohorts, like all of the quantiles for retention day 7, this gap in the middle that everybody has where it all goes down for a while. That's winter holidays. That's Christmas, New Year. What happens is people play a lot more at Christmas and New Year, but they tend to play a lot more games. So, and also when they go back to work, they tend to not necessarily pick up all the same games, right? So when like the first week at work, they will not play all the games they're playing the week before, which is why you see the drop in retention. We usually encourage people, like if you launch an app at the holidays, you may see higher traffic, but you're also going to see lower retention. So just keep that in mind. Any build that you release before the holidays, give it some time. To either test it out a bit before so you know what the retention is, or give it some time after, because what you really see in that 2-week period is not super indicative of how the game or the app will do as a whole. Secondly, something we start to see here is a drop in overall retention. So this is quite significant because we are seeing a drop of about, say 10%. So, day 7, for the top, for superstar games is about 20%, and then it goes down to about 18%. This is a very, very significant drop. This can mean tens of thousands of users, or hundreds of thousands of users for very successful games. So that can mean like a big chunk of revenue where you have to buy those users all over again to maintain your game competitive and maintain it at the top of the store. And we see this kind of drop applies across all of the quantiles, but it's a sharper drop at the top, actually. So the more successful the game, it seems, the more impacted it would be by this drop in retention. And we're going to look at kind of how this looks for day 28 as well, and then we're going to see if we can try to explain this. So first of all, how does day 7 look per genre? So we start to see here that some games, initially like day 25, like top 25%, all genres were the same. Then superstar genres, some start to separate in the center. Then day 7, superstar genres, like that separation has become more and more. Now some genres are here in the middle. They have great day 7 retention. They have, if you remember, median day 1 retention was 25%, but superstar games have retention of 25% for day 7. So it is a significant difference between how you see these metrics. Secondly, the puzzle genre starts to stand out because it does appear to have a genre with very competitive, it does appear to be a genre with very competitive and great day 7 retention. This does mean that if you have a puzzle game, you can't just treat it like the rest of casual, hyper casual games. So the next, in its category, the arcade genre, most associated with hyper casual games that are very popular now, is only around 18% retention, 19, whereas puzzle is 25. That is a very significant difference, right? Like that is about a 60% difference in the two. So you really need to measure these things by genre and to measure them accurately. The other thing to note is that these mid-core genres, strategy, RPG, multiplayer, all of these games have lower day 7 retention. They tend to be more binary. Either people love them or they don't. They either come back and do a lot of stuff in the game, or they leave them from the very beginning and they never come back. So they seem to be much more polarizing genres, where things like word trivia, people don't spend too much in them, but they do come back at very high rates. Okay, so day 28 retention, the drop that we are seeing for day 7 is now fully visible for day 20 retention. And again, the more it is more visible at the top. So for the highest performing games, here it's dropped by about 20%. So from 12 to 10%, 2 full percentage points from the beginning of the year, from the middle of last year to this year. And interestingly, this seemed to happen at times when major new streams of games are launched. So before the holidays in Q4, then again around kind of Easter time between Q1, Q2, there's another drop. It's interesting to see this. We do see this across the entire industry, and we have people come to us go like, my numbers are looking different from last year. Do you know what's happening? It is true. The market is starting to behave slightly differently with people switching, even for very successful games, people switch between more games. I think they've been used to kind of many games coming out in very quick succession. The top of the App Store is always different, so they always know they'll find something new there. And that is impacting the economics of every single game, because if you're expecting that you're going to hold on for users for a certain amount of time that will make you profitable, that is no longer the case. So that needs to be revised. The other interesting thing when we go and look at this per genre is that, we see day 28 retention that is above 16% for some genres. Puzzle is one of them, but card games, board games, they tend to have day 28 retention that is equal to what people tell you your day 7 should be, right? So for very competitive genres, people hang on not just for a whole week, they hang on for a whole month. And you really need, when you look at these numbers and people tell you, oh, you need to have above 15% day 7 retention. Yeah, you do in some cases. Yeah, you do for kind of arcade games, for like very simple games. But the games that have puzzle mechanics, no, you need to have that above that for day 28. So you need to keep measuring, you need to keep improving that if you're going to be competitive. And as kind of, in terms of, okay, people come back, but do they play at the same rates, or do they spend more time, less time? How does their kind of return behavior also impact the time that they spend in the game? This is a more nuanced situation. We do see a drop in some quantiles, like the top 25%, but the top 5% only seem to see a drop towards the summer this year. So as the weather got warmer, they've tended to see an overall of a drop, but that is still significant because it is below what it was before. I would say though, for average session length, this differs massively by genre. So we're gonna go and look into that. So what you see here is arcade games are tappers, right? Games that you all have on your phone. They have very much shorter session lengths. Like these are games that you play in the train on your way to work, and typically they have about 15-minute session length. Whereas card casino games, they can have an hour session length, which is like a massive difference. And multiplayer and RPG games, this is where these guys start to shine, right? You can tell that maybe fewer people play these games, but when they play, they put hours into these games. So if you are going to go for a mid-core game, you can't just look at the industry standard and say, oh, top 5% of games is 30 minutes. No, for your genre, it's an hour. Like you need to double that quickly. So it's very important to look at it this way. Also, games that we saw earlier doing very well with retention, word and trivia, very low on average session length. So also quick games that are quick to play and so on. This also means that, you don't have to excel in every metric. You can just pick one. Like you can have a very addictive game, or you can have a game that people spend a lot of time in. But you need to pick one and stick with it, right? Instead of being kind of average across the board, because something needs to take you to the top of the App Store. And usually people pick retention because, it's very much like if people are there, you can do more things, add more features to the game to increase average session length. But if they are not there, there's not a lot you can do to make that game profitable. So retention is still what I would say you should optimize for first. Now, let's have a look at just overall revenue numbers and how this impacts the games. This is one of my favorite slides in this presentation, because this is where you start to see the 10x effect. So if you look on the right, just the blue line at the bottom, that is the median, right? So the median physically means that 50% games have more, 50% have less, right? So it's the point right in the middle of the distribution. And that is about $6, right? And top 5% of games are about $60. So this is where you really see that effect of, like, there isn't like a 2, 3, 30%, 60% difference. No, great games make 10 times more money than average games. And still, even at the very top, right? The top 5% compared to the top 20% is double or triple. So once you got in the top 20% and so on, and you think, okay, my game is doing pretty well. Yes, but continuing to optimize, that's where you actually make the most gains. When you start to optimize from like being in the top 20% to being in the top 10, 15, because it gets far more competitive at the top, and that's where most of the money is. So you really want to keep pushing your game up. Secondly, this also applies for ARPDAU. So ARPDAU is, average revenue per daily active user, how much money you make for each user in the game. Same, like the basic economics seems to be the same. The median, the blue line at the bottom, is around 2 cents. Here it's even more pronounced, where it's more around 40 cents. So it's about 20 times higher for top performing games. Than it is for regular games. So it is, again, that it really shows that you are orders and orders of magnitude. If you're an average game or an average app, you're orders and orders of magnitude below what you need to have to be competing. You don't need to double or triple it. You need to 10x, 20x your performance. So you need to do like broad strokes. You need to have ideas that will kind of change things significantly for you. And this is interesting to look at per genre, because it varies, and it varies even between the two, like average revenue per daily active users versus average revenue per paying users. So average revenue per daily active is, of course, a metric you can optimize by also doing microtransactions. Many people buying small things, right? Whereas average revenue per paying user is usually optimized by a few people buying a lot of stuff. Right. So on the left, you have RPGs dominating ARPDAU, right? This makes sense. People usually need to buy stuff in RPGs. They will buy coins and gems in order to get items and so on. And you really see that this monetization strategy can work. It's the ARPDAU, we saw ARPDAU on the slide before. I just want to put this into context that great ARPDAU on the right is about 40 cents for top 5% of games. But here for the RPG genre, it's about 4 times as high. So again, even like if you take the top 5%, if your game is an RPG game, it's like 4 times higher than the top 5% of games as a whole. Everybody else, like most other games, seem to be in this 25 cents to 50 cents range. So it does apply to most genres, but not to the RPG genre. On the average revenue per paying user, here you find gambling-like games. Unfortunately, fortunately, I guess, for people who develop them, but unfortunately, I guess, for society, you find the gambling type games where people they're not very high traffic, but people who spend time in there tend to spend a lot of money. Interestingly enough, you find that kind of casual-like games are also doing pretty well in this category, where this entire group of games on the left, like action, adventure, arcade, they have some top-performing games. In each genre, there are top-performing games that do really well. So this means, like, fine, you can have a strategy that optimizes for volume, but there are games successfully optimizing for whales. So it is possible in any genre to do this. But of course, I think it's a matter of kind of where you want to go with your strategy, and usually having a volume strategy is a somewhat safer bet. Goody. And now kind of to bring this into context, conversion. And again, this is another graph that I really like, because a conversion also seems to be slightly going down across the board, except for the top 5% of games. It seems like everybody is like slowly decreasing in conversion, and then this one group at the top, the red line at the top, these guys are increasing. So they seem to be, the most competitive games seem to be eating away revenue and conversions and transactions from everybody below. So the discrepancy is getting bigger instead of getting smaller. It's hard to explain why this is, but this has been happening for a while. It's a clear trend that is lasting for 9 months. So it's not like this is a blip. This is really happening. We don't know if it's discoverability. Maybe AppFollow can provide some insight on this as well. But we see this happening. And again, even in conversion, the median blue line at the bottom is around 0.2%. A red line at the top is around 2%. So 10x difference between, a game in the middle of the pack versus a game at the top. Yes, and in terms of genres, again, we see role-playing and strategy games do super well. So again, games that have a more traditional in-app purchase strategy. You can tell that people in these games know how to have a proper conversion strategy, and that they are experts at this. They've been doing this for a while. By comparison, on the left-hand side, more casual-like games that tend to monetize more with ads, conversion is overall like 3 times lower than it is right in a strategy or RPG game. So it does seem like this is also skewed in terms of, in some genres, some games go very IAP heavy, and others where it's more balanced and people monetize with ads more. Things are not as optimized for conversion. This can be also a game depth issue. There are not as many things to buy in a simpler game as there are in a very rich universe, so that can be a thing. But it can also mean that there is potential because, like I said, there are whales across any genre. So maybe you could capture people, and maybe you could improve your IAP monetization strategy by adding more game depth, giving people more reasons to buy, more items to buy, and so on, if you can do that without, of course, cluttering the game and affecting the core mechanic. Right, we're going to go quickly for ad revenue now. This is a kind of guest data set that we have from our friends at Tenjin. And we don't have the top numbers here. We just have the median numbers. It's kind of eCPM. This holds true of kind of industry knowledge that eCPM is between $4 and $5. But there's something I want to show you guys that is interesting. So you see, in terms of eCPM, so countries making the most money with ad revenue are US and China, very far from everybody else, like twice more revenue than anybody else. And then if we look at CPI, so cost per install, what it costs to get traffic in general in games so that you can monetize this traffic with ad revenue, median is about 30 cents. Again, it's fine. We know great games do better. We know some games that have more depth and have users that are more expensive to buy. But interestingly, under CPI, so actually paying per user to install the game, China is somewhere in the middle. US is still at the top, but China is right in the middle of the pack. So that would make, according to like these numbers, China the most profitable economy to grow in right now from an ad revenue point of view, because you can buy users for 20 cents and you can monetize them at double eCPMs, like tier 1 eCPMs. Compared to other countries. So it's definitely an interesting economy. We do see people doing this. So definitely would recommend having a look at it if you don't optimize for China already. Okay, and we're nearly done. We're just gonna kind of do the conclusion, but essentially, you've already heard me say this multiple times. Superstar games have a 10x effect. If you have an app and not a game, I would say we track user behavior across many games. I don't think it matters that much. It's just that, superstars behave very differently than average games or apps. And we do see a 10x effect, whether it's sometimes 8x, 15x, but we see this kind of massive difference between superstars and average performers. Secondly, retention is decreasing. So if you do see that this may impact you as well, if you see that your retention numbers have been lower in the past 6 months than you were used to from last year, that may truly be the case, and it may be a market effect. And thirdly, the ad market is competitive, but there are economies that are more profitable than others, and China appears to look really great on that spectrum, where if you haven't considered it yet, you probably should, because it looks like it could be more profitable than, for instance, doing the typical things, which is buying US users, what everybody wants to do. And I think we're almost done. All these figures will be available in a report we'll be putting out. You can, this is a QR code for it, which is probably, we should have just had a URL for this. But yeah, I think we're ready.